Now over to Alistair Stewart and Trevor McDonald at ITN. This is Granada at 10 o'clock.
Fed up to the back teeth, dentists reject patients over pay. French patient snaps, force takes on the striking truckers. Germany shoots down Britain's European fighter aircraft compromise. £1 million damages for silencing her gift of music. And Gower's record, nice for him, vital for England. Good evening. A vote by Britain's dentists to refuse new NHS patients and freeze out some existing ones in a row over pay has left the service in a state of turmoil. As much as half the population, including many children, may find themselves being refused NHS treatment by dentists. They're angry about a proposed cut in their fees and voted overwhelmingly for the protest. Health Secretary Virginia Bottomley urged them to think long and hard before taking action. Labour said it was a government-created crisis.
Dentists claim they're being slowly but surely starved of NHS funds. Rather than wither on the vine, they've voted to move towards the private sector en masse, spurred on by a 7% fee cut due to come into effect on Wednesday.
We can't sustain dentistry within the National Health Service in the face of cuts year on year. The quality of our work is going to suffer, and we're very, very keen to maintain the quality of dentistry within the National Health Service.
The government says the cut is justified because dentists have treated more people than expected, and that even after a 7% reduction, dentists will be earning a healthy salary. It estimates that next year the average dentist will receive £88,000 from the NHS. Out of that, the dentist must pay for materials, staff and rent about £47,000, leaving the dentist with an income of £41,000. The British Dental Association says the real figure is nearer £35,000, and that whilst dentists with large private practices do make a comfortable living, those who do mainly NHS work, like Oriel Gibson, find it impossible to make ends meet. They say they simply can't afford to take on any more NHS patients.
I would actually go bankrupt because I'm not prepared to compromise my quality care. I'm not prepared to compromise on materials, I'm not prepared to compromise on cross-infection control, and I'm not prepared to shortchange the patients.
The action will affect patients who aren't currently registered with a dentist, including those who are usually exempt, like children and pregnant women. Some dentists may also start to deregister existing NHS patients, but dentist leaders are advising members to think carefully about the consequences before acting. Patients forced to go privately will face dramatically increased dental charges. A check-up on the NHS costs £3.45. Privately, it costs an average of £40. A routine filling is £3.75 on the NHS and averages £20 in private practice. And a new set of dentures, which costs £72 on the NHS, could cost £600 privately. The government has given the go-ahead for local health authorities to employ more salaried dentists. So far, there are only a handful. But with 25 million people currently not registered with a dentist, they're unlikely to be able to take up the slack. In the Commons this afternoon, the government asked dentists not to act before the system had been reviewed.
Fundamental review offers a far more constructive way forward than action to withdraw NHS services from NHS patients.
Labour claimed dentistry was being privatised.
The Secretary of State, what other word would the honourable members opposite prefer us to use now that more and more dental patients are being told they must go private?
That claim is echoed by dentist leaders. They hope the result of the ballot will be enough to persuade the government to give ground. If not, they warn, NHS dentistry as it currently exists could become a thing of the past. Jennifer Nadel, News at 10, Central London.
The French government finally ordered direct action against the lorry drivers' blockade today, but with only limited success. Hundreds of riot police, aided by a tank and armoured vehicles, cleared up to 15 roads, but new blockades appeared elsewhere. Tonight, the impact of the dispute is spreading across Europe. One international haulage union wants the EC to intervene. Early this morning, police cleared a blockade on the motorway between Paris and Lille. But new roadblocks were set up on the main motorway to the southwest at Poitiers and near Bordeaux further south. it's estimated that 150 roadblocks remain in place across the country.
After a week of inaction, the police finally got their orders today to get the lorry drivers out. Using a tank borrowed from the army, they began trying to clear the main road between Calais and Paris. Some of the truckers were defiant to the last. And even with the tanks, the huge juggernauts proved difficult to shift. Eventually, the main blockade on the road near Lille was cleared. But just minutes later, the lorry drivers switched tactics, using their vehicles to form long columns, inching slowly down the motorway at less than 10 miles an hour. I'm now on the main motorway heading into Lille. Behind me, what's known as Operation Escargot, literally Operation Snail. The lorries no longer blockading the road, simply driving so slowly that nothing can get past. That includes the farmers trying to get their produce to market. Today, in their frustration, they dumped tons of peaches in the centre of Montpellier in the south of France. We worked all year for this harvest, and now the crop's wasted, he says. But the lorry drivers responsible for the chaos show no sign of relenting. Most of those involved are self-employed. They're worried that a new penalty point system will mean that after just a few offences, they could lose their licence and their livelihood. With the law already in place, it's difficult for the government, in talks at the Transport Ministry today, to back down. One possible compromise being considered is to extend the points on a licence. But today, the mother of a young drink-drive victim urged them to stand firm. Her daughter was killed at the age of 22.
What about the victims? If all our dead of 1 year were just able to put their own coffins, that would be 10,000 coffins. Since the death of my daughter, which means 6 years ago, that would be 60,000 coffins on the roads. We could block the roads with 60,000 coffins.
Tonight, more riot police are lining up to clear the blockades, but the standoff between the lorry drivers and the government seems certain to continue. Libby Wiener, News at 10, Paris.
Germany told Britain today it has formally grounded its involvement in the European fighter aircraft project. The German Defence Minister, Mr. Volker Röhr, confirmed that not only was Germany withdrawing, but it wouldn't opt for a cheaper version of the same plane either. Here, Defence Secretary Malcolm Rifkin said Britain now wanted urgent talks with its other EFA partners, Italy and Spain, on a less expensive model. 40,000 British jobs depend on EFA going ahead.
The European fighter, known as EFA, is under fire from two quarters, its cost and whether it's still needed. All this before the first full prototype has flown. This is just an experimental version. In London today, Germany's Defence Minister Volker Röhr confirmed his country couldn't afford EFA and wouldn't be building the plane, not even the simplified economy model which Britain's suggesting he should accept.
It would be like buying a Rolls-Royce, finding out you don't really have the money, and then say, well, let's do without a wheel. I don't think that makes much sense.
He told Defence Secretary Malcolm Rifkind Germany still needed a new fighter, but suggested the four EFA partners should scrap what they've done so far and spend the rest of the development money on a cheaper, less sophisticated design. The suggestion was ridiculed in London.
They may wish to throw away billions of pounds of expenditure and commit themselves to a new fighter aircraft which they don't even know how much it's going to cost them. That seems to me not something that the British taxpayer would be attracted by, or indeed the Italian or Spanish taxpayer.
The new Italian Prime Minister told John Major in Munich today he was also deeply concerned at EFA's cost, suggesting savings already identified may not be enough. Britain's building the forward fuselage and constructing a wing with Spain. Italy makes a wing and shares the rear fuselage with Spain. Germany was to make the centre fuselage and fin. That work must be redistributed. Reorganising manufacture could cut costs, so could reducing the weapon systems. German politicians say EFA is unnecessarily sophisticated now the Soviet threat has gone, but is evidence the German Air Force is being muzzled on the issue.
I've spoken to a number of senior German Air Force officers who said that they are being kept out of the discussion so far, and they would of course like to be involved because they are the ones who determine what the threat is out there.
There is another crucial point. Germany wants a fighter for the defence of Europe, But Britain plans a more global defence role, wanting a plane that can beat the best that any enemy might put up. How the Italians and Spanish see the future of their air forces could decide whether the European fighter finally takes off. Geoffrey Archer, News at 10, London.
Mr. Major went on the offensive over the stalled GATT trade talks today. The Prime Minister told the summit of G7 industrial powers in Munich that they must move quickly to resolve a dispute between the United States and Europe over farm subsidies. French President François Mitterrand, under strong pressure from his farmers to resist cuts in subsidies, will have private talks with Mr. Major tomorrow.
Some of the G7 leaders were in exuberant mood as they arrived for the official opening of the summit today. But the occasion was marked by more of the disturbances which have come to characterize this conference. John Major has staked much of his reputation here on achieving a breakthrough in the so-called GATT trade liberalisation talks. The President Mitterrand of France, facing angry protest at home, is resisting any concessions, especially on the issue of farm subsidies. At this afternoon's opening session, John Major made what government sources called a forceful intervention about trade. They also said he would meet President Mitterrand for private talks tomorrow. As the Prime Minister returned to his hotel, the matter was still on his mind.
If we wish to restore world confidence to trade and see trade generally lift off, then one of the most important ingredients, if not the most important agreement, is final settlement of the GATT round.
The summit also had a visit from the head of the International Monetary Fund, who yesterday agreed a $1 billion loan to Russia. He indicated up to $3 billion more could be on the way.
This should come very soon. We have the month of October in our mind for such an arrangement if everything goes smoothly.
Despite the sumptuousness of the surroundings, the economic message of this summit is one of austerity. Cutting the amount governments borrow is seen as the best way of getting interest rates down. The stage is now set for tomorrow's arrival of the Russian President Boris Yeltsin. Today he increased his demands. He'll be asking that the debt repayments of the former Soviet Union be delayed for several years. Greg Wood, News at 10, Munich.
Also on Mr. Yeltsin's mind, the Commonwealth of Independent States is to set up its own peacekeeping force in an attempt to halt the growing ethnic conflicts in the former Soviet republics. Its first mission will be in Moldova, where hundreds have died in fighting between the Russian minority and the Romanian majority.
A young violinist whose career was ended by a car crash was awarded £1.4 million in damages by the High Court today. Rosie Johnson was the first violin with the Welsh National Opera when she suffered brain injuries in the accident 4 years ago. She'd been expected to progress to one of the top London orchestras. Now she can't even hold her violin. Kevin Dunn reports.
Four years ago, Rosie Johnson had, the High Court heard, a promising, if not glittering, career ahead of her. She played with the Welsh National Opera Orchestra and seemed destined to reach the very top in classical music. But her career was tragically curtailed by a car crash, and she will now need constant care for the rest of her life.
She might have been a leader eventually, probably in a big London orchestra.
Her father says the settlement cannot compensate for what she has lost.
It doesn't. I once asked Rosie when she was in Putney, I said, do you think £1 million would be sufficient compensation? She shook her head, no. And I said, what about 2? And she shook her head again. And I said, are you trying to tell me that no money can compensate? And she said, yes. And I was very surprised because I hadn't been thinking in those terms, but she obviously thinks of things more deeply than I do. And I think she's enjoying it at the moment because you rather like to be the centre of attention, don't you, Rosie? Yes. And things are going very well for her at the moment. I think she's quite happy.
But although Rosie can no longer play, she can still listen to music, including recordings of the music she herself once made.
It's for others to judge why, but the facts confirm Scotland is becoming increasingly violent. The latest figures show murders up 100%, offences where firearms are used up 50%. Testing the figures and seeking the answers in Glasgow, a special report in Part 2. Plus, England frustrate Pakistan, a tiff over toughness with the tail enders. And the war of the soaps. Will the Northern champion give way to the challenger from Spain? That's in a couple of minutes.
Get out! Everything in this whole sordid mess is down to you! God, you're naive. You can't even understand what you've done.
Get out! Look me in the face and you tell me that this lie is worth more than your life.